It's good to be with you all on this Sunday afternoon. As Pam mentioned, I attend St. Peter's, so I don't come from too far away. And sometimes after coffee hour, I see your community setting up for service. So it's a pleasure to actually be here and to worship with you all. Today is notable for a few reasons. It marks the fourth Sunday of Advent. It marks the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. And it also marks 1 week since the pretty extraordinary acts of violence we had at the end of last weekend, with the massacre at a Hanukkah celebration in Sydney, the shooting at Brown University, and the murders of Rob and Michelle Reiner. So I stand before you today wondering what word I have to speak into this mix of miracle and massacre. What do I say to traumatized students going home on winter break with the sound of gunshots ringing in their ears? What do I say to the families of those killed while celebrating the Festival of Light? And what do I say to all the rest of us who are limping along, doing our best to be decent human beings in a world of ever-increasing night? The fourth candle of Advent symbolizes love. On Christmas, the church remembers the miraculous day when God descended into time and space and took on human form. On that day, the fabric of history split open to reveal a love so great that it wrote itself into the story. And we are all recipients of that miracle. But Advent is not only a season of remembrance, it is also a season of waiting. In Advent, we acknowledge that the good ending, the happy ever after that we all yearn for, is not yet here. In Advent, we say that what was promised when Christ became flesh and made his dwelling among us has yet to be fulfilled. In other words, Advent is a balancing act, remembering the miracle and awaiting the promise. Not an easy thing to do. Like many of you, I imagine, I've grown up with the story of Christmas. The gospel accounts of Jesus' birth are deeply familiar to me. And yet, as I get older, I'm increasingly struck by what a strange, contradictory, and even dark story it is. It turns out the wooden nativity scene hides a few splinters. For instance, have you ever read the gospel accounts of Jesus' birth side by side? If you have, you'll know that they unambiguously contradict one another. Matthew tells us that Joseph thought he'd been cheated on until an angel appeared to him in a dream. Luke has an entire opening act that none of the other gospels mention. Luke also records Mary, not Joseph, as the recipient of the angel visit. Matthew brings in wise men. Luke introduces shepherds. Matthew writes about a flight to Egypt and a massacre of Bethlehem babies. Luke says nothing about any of that, but instead talks about a census and a stable. Mark does manage to avoid the contradictions, but only by starting his story 30 years after Jesus was born. And John, as we heard a moment ago, John writes of the incarnation in a different language entirely. But it's not just that the Christmas accounts are strange. It is also a story full of darkness and vulnerability. When we look closely, we see it everywhere. Zechariah and Elizabeth spent most of their lives childless, facing the judgment of their neighbors. Joseph and Mary were a vulnerable young couple chosen for, yes, a wonderful but also overwhelming purpose. They lived under the cruel oppression of the Roman Empire. As soon as Jesus was born, they were forced to leave everything behind and flee to a foreign country to live as refugees. And in response to Jesus' birth, a threatened king slaughtered Bethlehem's most innocent. On a long, dark night, into stigma and political danger, the great gift of God entered the world with tremendous grief. And 2,000 years later, on another long night, the gift and the grief live side by side. But you don't need me to tell you that. Every person here is living with their own mix of gift and grief. The hope of Advent wrestling with the weariness of it all. For God so loved the world. Some of the first words we learn to rattle off in Sunday school. But what does that really mean? What are we doing when we light this fourth candle of love? I don't have an answer to these questions, but I will say this. I work as a pediatric palliative care chaplain at a children's hospital. Every day, I walk alongside children and their families as they navigate illness and death. For me, these questions of Advent are never far away. And I wish I could show you what these parents in my hospital feel for their children. The way they become medical experts in a matter of days, learning an entirely new language so that they can understand what is happening inside their children. The moms who sleep on the uncomfortable couch next to the hospital bed for 200 nights straight while their child waits on the heart transplant list. The dads who work the midnight shift in order to provide for their families, and then drive straight to the hospital at 6 a.m. so they can spend a few hours with their kid before they have to do it all over again. The way that these parents look at their children, many who will never be able to walk or talk or do any of the ordinary things that make up a life, and absolutely, unequivocally see them as the most incredible person in the universe. How so many of them tell me that they ask God to let them trade places. How, when there is no more treatment, no more options to try, they climb into the bed with their child and give to them with their bodies and shelter them in a way that medicine has failed to do. That's love. It cannot possibly be contained in human language. If I live to be 100, I'm convinced I will never witness anything more powerful, more tender, or more heartbreaking. For God so loved the world. If that's what human love looks like, can you even imagine the utter mystery and depth that is described in those 6 words? How infinitely more powerful that love must be. How infinitely more tender and more heartbreaking. The love of a parent for their child is just a suggestion of the love of God for his children. The way that a drawing of waves is just a suggestion of the Pacific Ocean. In Advent, we remember, and in Advent, we await. We live in the in-between, where gift and grief exist together. And it's a vulnerable place to be. It's a vulnerable way to live. Every stable could be the site of a miracle, and every miracle might be followed by a massacre. But if we are deeply vulnerable, then we are also vulnerable to love, to God's love, which stops at nothing and holds no part of itself back. A love which became human, which learned our language, which traded places with us, which shelters next to us until there is no more death, no more darkness, no more night. This is the vulnerability of Advent. Thanks be to God.